Types of data: primary and secondary, quantitative and qualitative. The learning outcomes include: explain qualitative and quantitative data. What do they mean? What are their definitions? Describe primary and secondary data collection. Evaluate when you should use quantitative and/or qualitative data collection techniques for your research. Justify when you would use primary and/or secondary data collection methods. The types of data that we will be looking at in this lesson include primary and secondary data, as well as quantitative and qualitative data. We'll start with primary data. Primary data is gathered by you. You may observe people, you may survey them, you may do interviews, you may give them questionnaires in electronic format, you may talk to them via Skype or observe them through some video conferencing, but you collect the data. And you see below some of the common types: questionnaires, interviews, and direct observation. You do this when the data does not already exist. Secondary data, by contrast, is obtained from other sources. Things like the census, the stock market websites. In this case, wherever you obtain the data, you must properly credit the author as the owner of the data. For instance, I just learned that the population of Atlanta, Georgia, as of January 28, 2016, was 420,003. That is from the U.S. Census Bureau, from the 2010 demographic profile. There was no need for me to gather that information myself. The census is there. Their numbers may or may not be more reliable than mine. If I wanted to disprove the census, perhaps I could gather my own primary data there. But in most cases, no need to reinvent the wheel. I might want to look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, their long-term performance. Well, this article from 2013 takes a look at it and may give me the information I need. You may use any type of information that's relevant to your research study or to your project. If the data already exists and you believe that it's good, then don't gather it yourself if you can afford to pay for the data that you want or that you need to create the project that you're doing. In general, if you can do a study that includes primary data and secondary data, so you gather some yourself, maybe you gather data on why people decide to buy and sell stocks at certain times, and then you look at secondary data to see if the evidence supports that or can contribute to your understanding of people's motivations for buying and selling stock. So you get a more accurate picture of what's really going on. In that case, we ask people what they would do in a situation, and then we look to see what groups of people did in situations just like that. So it often gives you more accurate predictions. Of course, it costs more to gather primary and secondary data. You've got to collect your own data and find the other data that may be relevant as secondary data for your project. Now let's talk about quantitative data. As you would expect, It's numbers. It's something that I can measure and compare to each other. Phone numbers would not qualify. I can't say that a number that differs by 1 is 1 less than the number above it, or a number that differs by 10 is 10 more or less than any other number. That has no meaning in terms of comparing to each other. Numbers, social security numbers, KSU ID numbers, those are not relevant. Those would be qualitative data. Something that can be measured. Length, width, height, weight, temperature, age, cost, profits. You can look at sales of particular products in a particular region. All of that would be considered quantitative data. You could ask someone, how old are you? In years, round to the nearest year. What was the net profit for Region 3? These are data points that you can collect and compare to other data points. Qualitative data, by contrast, is more subjective, whereas quantitative data is objective. You have a measurement. It should be true across people. Qualitative is going to be more subjective. Observations you make after talking with people or observing them, or however you gather your data. You often use open-ended questions, and from those you find common themes that emerge across all of the respondents that you had. So you did observe their responses to your interview questions, for instance, but you could not measure how long it took them to complete a manufacturing process or how tall they were. That wasn't relevant. You were asking them qualitative questions. Some examples. How do you think the company could improve its customer service? You would hope to find then common themes across respondents that you could then integrate into the company or recommend how they could solve some of their problems. What are the company's 3 most important challenges for the next year? This may give you some interesting ideas as you complete strategic planning within your organization. So this would be qualitative data. We also have to remember we have to interpret our results with caution. We see that the first man on the left says, "My, that is a very tall woman." The first man on the right says, "No, that is a short woman." People still have their own perspectives and their own biases as they're completing qualitative, quantitative studies, and we have to keep that in mind. So you can use all the quantitative data you can get, but you still have to distrust it and use your own intelligence and judgment. You may get a sample where everyone is very, very tall. So if you ask questions about height, they may base it upon themselves. That's a very simple example, but it shows that you do have to still use what you know about the topic and what you know about research and interpret with caution. Qualitative data describes, lets you learn more. Richer data takes longer to gather and analyze, whereas quantitative data defines, gives you quick access to a large number of people, may not be representative, and has some inherent limitations. Which one's better? It depends. They're both good. Much like we saw with our primary and secondary data, if you can use qualitative and quantitative data, perhaps you do ask people questions about their perceptions of the direction the company is going. And you ask them open-ended qualitative questions as well as quantitative statements on which they agree to strongly disagree. or strongly agree to strongly disagree. So you have a quantitative method of analyzing it, and then you follow up with a few members that you choose because of their place in the population, and you make sure you get a wide range of people, and you measure their perceptions as well with the interview. Gives you the rich data. You don't have to spend as many resources because you've chosen only a handful to try to help you better understand the quantitative data. It will give you the chance for more accurate predictions. To summarize, several definitions we're about to go through here, and you can read more about these at businessdictionary.com. Quantitative data. That is numbers. Information that it makes sense to compare, add and subtract from one, and gives you some meaning. You may have statistics here as well. Qualitative data does not measure directly, may look for themes, may look for commonalities, may learn more about a problem and then design a survey. Primary data is what you as a researcher gather yourself, typically because there's no secondary data available that's relevant to your study. Secondary data is data that has already been published and completed from a source that you consider to be reputable, and it works for your study. In terms of which to use, do we use qualitative or quantitative data? Do we use primary or secondary? Well, you want to look at your goals, the limitations of the study that you might have, what you hope to learn, and the number of possible respondents, how you're going to find those respondents, the cost, the time, all of that, and how accurate you need to be if you're talking with a system that could impact quality of life or could harm someone. You need to invest more resources into making the predictions as strong as possible. In any case, what you want to do is use multiple types of data, qualitative and quantitative, primary and secondary, in every study if you can. That's impractical for many reasons, such as resources and lack of access to participants who qualify, but you want to use data gathered during using different qualitative and quantitative techniques from different sources, both primary and secondary, to complete a study with better predictions at the end.